talk about Afghanistan during the last 30 years and which were the conflicts, the main characters, and which are the consequences today in our lives and in the world.
What is the main conflict about?
Well, the conflict started in the summer of 1973 when Mohammed Daoud, the former prime minister, launched a successful coup against King Zahir. Daoud himself was more nationalist than socialist, but his coup was dependent on pro-Soviet military. Since 1955, Moscow had provided military training and material to Afghanistan. By 1973, a third of active troops had trained on Soviet soil. Additionally, Dawood enjoyed the support of the People's Democratic Party of Afghanistan, like PDPA, founded in 1965 upon Marxist ideology and allegiance to Moscow. In 1967, the PDPA split into factions: the Porchamists, led by Babrak Karmal, and the Khalqis, led by Noor Taraki. For the next 5 years, Daoud attempted the impossible task of governing Afghanistan's Islamic tribal regions, while struggling to reconcile the PDPA split. But the more radical Khalq faction never fully recognized Daoud's leadership, while Karmal viewed the coup largely as a means to consolidate his own power. In response, Daoud hoped to mitigate both of these threats by steering Afghanistan away from the Soviet influence and improving U.S. relations, while decreasing the influence of radical elements in the government and militarily. On April 28, 1978, soldiers aligned with Taraki's cult faction assaulted the President's palace, where troops executed Daoud and his family. In the following days, Taraki became the prime minister, and in an attempt to end the PDPA divisions, Karmal became the deputy prime minister. In Washington, this communist revolution was met with an alarm. The Carter administration recognized that Taraki would undo Daoud's attempt to steer Afghanistan away from Moscow, and it debated whether to cut ties with Afghanistan or recognize Taraki in the hopes that the Soviet influence could be contained. Shortly after the revolution, Washington recognized the new government and soon named Adolf Dubs its ambassador to Afghanistan. In the summer of 1979, Hafizullah Amin, a longtime ally of Taraki who became deputy prime minister following the April Revolution, received word that Babrak Karmal was leading a parchment plot to overthrow the Taraki regime. Amin took the opportunity to purge and execute many Parchamists and consolidate his own power. Complicating matters further, this internal strife damaged the Kabul government's major national program, namely, to bring the communist revolution to the Islamic tribal areas beyond Kabul. By the winter of 1978, this program was met by armed revolt throughout the country. In response, Amin and the Taraki traveled to Moscow to sign a friendship treaty which included a provision that would allow direct Soviet military assistance should the Islamic insurgency threaten the regime. By mid-1979, Moscow was searching to replace Taraki and Amin, and dispatched combat troops to Bagram Air Base outside the Kabul. This move prompted the Carter administrations to begin supplying non-lethal aid to Afghan mujahideen, or Islamic insurgents. In August, a high-ranking Soviet military delegation arrived in Kabul to assess the situation. U.S. officials interpreted this mission as one of the last Soviet attempts to shore up the Taraki regime, and also as an opportunity to devise a military takeover. Regarding the latter, most analysts in Washington believe that such a move remained possible but unlikely. Amin, since the Soviet mission was designed to strengthen Taraki at his expense. In response, forces loyal to Amin executed Taraki in October, a move that infuriated Moscow, which began amassing combat units along its border. By the winter of 1979, faced with mutinies and an uncertain leadership, the Afghan army was unable to provide basic security to the government against the onslaught of Islamic fighters nearing Kabul. By that point, the Soviets were sending in motorized divisions and special forces. Washington demanded an explanation, which the Soviets ignored. Finally, on Christmas Eve, the invasion began. Soviet troops killed Amin and installed Babrak Karmal as the Soviets' puppet head of the government. The invasion stage from the 79 to early 1980 witnessed the securing of key infrastructure and the development of garrisons and bases. The RA forces were integrated with the Soviets and worked joint missions. The second stage from March 1980 to April 1985 involved wide-scale combat against the Mujahideen. The Soviets attempted a brute force approach, permitting the enemy to adopt operations from the mountains and hit and run guerrilla tactics. The Stage 3, from April 1985 to January 1987, saw the Soviets pull back the reins after their conventional warfare proved ineffectual. Instead, they will support Afghan government forces with aviation and artillery units, and focus on intelligence-driven ambushes and arms interceptions. The final stage of the war saw a switch to diplomatic efforts. The Soviets pushed Afghanistan's national reconciliation program and financed President Mohammad Najibullah to bring forth peace talks and a ceasefire. Through this time period, the Soviets would only fight in a defense context and were preparing for full military withdrawal, which took place in February.
Who were the main persons involved in this conflict?
We have Muhammad Tahir Shah that during the 60s began to modernize the country and also implemented some democratic reforms like free elections and equal political rights. Also, Muhammad Khan, who during 1973, while his cousin was in Italy, staged a coup d'etat and became the first president of the new Republic of Afghanistan. With him, women's rights improved and Afghanistan created relationships with other countries, and because of that, the economy experienced a substantial growth. He was focused on Pashtun nationalism, and the stage was marked by authoritarianism and some restrictions on civil liberties. Also, Nur Muhammad Taraki, who, as a president, immediately set in motion a program of Marxist reform, land reforms, the banning of forced marriages, discouraging women from wearing the veil, promoting literacy, and, most controversially, the advancement of women. Their aim was to eliminate the backwardness of past centuries within the lifespan of one generation. But for factions within the government, this was much too soon. The pace of reform became an issue and splits emerged, notably between Taraki and his Prime Minister Hafizullah Amin. Although US President Jimmy Carter's focus was more on Iran during the months before the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan, he initiated a covert program to the CIA to financially support the Afghan rebels, the Mujahideen, in July 1979. After the Soviet invasion in December 1979, which was a surprise for Carter, the CIA expanded the program, codenamed Operation Cyclone, and began providing weapons along with money to the Mujahideen through the Pakistan intelligence services. Operation Cyclone was one of the largest and most expensive covert CIA operations ever undertaken.
How does it affect Afghanistan and the world today?
The Soviet withdrawal began a long period of instability in Afghanistan. After the Soviet forces left, a number of Afghan factions continued to fight for control of the country. The radical Taliban Islamic militia came to power in 1994. It was ousted by US troops in late 2001 in the wake of the 9/11 terrorist attacks. Those attacks were blamed on the Al Qaeda network of Osama bin Laden, who was being sheltered in Afghanistan by the Taliban. The Soviet invasion is also blamed for the rise of Islamic militancy. Foreign fighters who came to fight Soviet troops perceived their eventual withdrawal as their victory. The war created a class of hardline Islamic fighters, such as bin Laden, ready to fight for what they perceived as the interest of Islam around the world.
What was the relationship between the USA and the Soviet Union?
Well, the relationship between the USA and the USSR during the Cold War and during the Afghan Soviet War was obviously pretty tense. They were the main superpowers of the world, and well, the USSR was supporting the Afghan army, and the USA was supporting the opposite side. It was the Mujahideen's rebel side. This just made everything worse.
What was the number of dead people?
The result of this war was pretty bloody, since it led between 562,000 to 2 million dead people and refugees.
What are your opinions about the conflict?
Well, my opinion on this war is that it worked as a detonating on the Cold War. It just made the trouble way bigger, and it was nonsense, you know.
What were the Soviet Union's intentions when they tried to help Afghanistan?
What was the motivation of the USSR on supporting the Afghan army? Well, I guess that communism. Communism war was the Cold War was between communism and capitalism. So the USSR trying to maintain this and to get one more ally on the system that they believe of was kind of the motivation of them to support and not let the mujahideens or the rebel army to win against the government that was like part of them.
Thank you for watching this video. If you like, please subscribe, clicking the subscribe button down below and share this video with your friends.